قدس الله سره, to open on our hearts from the station of Shaykh, by blessing of Allah Almighty, blessing of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, blessing Allah Almighty bless us what we need. Today is very holy day of Yawm al-Jumu'ah, which Allah chooses to be day for beloved Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. All prophets, they ask Allah Almighty to give them this day, and Allah Almighty told them, no, this day not for you, my prophets, it is only for my beloved, sealed of Prophet Sayyidina Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and his nation. I kept it for them, because Allah Almighty in this day, Maulana say, will address Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam in all means of godly oceans of lights, of beautiness. Allah will address him by oceans of salam, by oceans of mercies, oceans of blessing, oceans of good tidings, to be distributed from him over his nation, over his ummah Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, ummatul Muhammadiyya. Kuntum khayra ummatin ukhrijat linnas. You used to be and still forever the best nation, which I presented it between all people, between all children of Adam alayhi salam, nation of beloved Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. For the sake of whom? For the sake of our good deeds, or our goodness, or for the sake of our beloved Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, whom Allah Almighty chose him and was the beloved to Allah Almighty, and dressed him to be the most beloved creation to Allah Almighty, to be the most beloved godly word of Allah Almighty, from which Allah Almighty appearings and creatings, all his creation and all the manifestations, all lights, divinely, heavenly, earthly, all from the divine, the godly word of beloved Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, which Allah chose it to be the word of his lights, the example of the light of Allah Almighty. The divinely godly word of light, which is the example of the godly lights of Allah Almighty, from which everything is appearing. Allah Almighty chose for them in this earth, in this planet, in this earthly station, to have this day to be as a Eid, a festival for them, for thanking Allah Almighty that He make us from the nation of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and thanking Allah Almighty, shukr lillah azza wa jal, that He is dressing Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, which was not dressed to any prophets, to any one of His creation, neither malaika or prophet of malaika, or earthly creation, or the prophets or their nations, were dressed to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam from Allah Almighty, and was given from Allah Almighty to Rasulullah. No one of creations of Allah Almighty was given. No one created from Allah Almighty to be given and dressed by what Allah Almighty dressing to His beloved Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam never accepting anything for himself except to share all his ummah, all his nation. Just he won't coming in sujood state when he was coming down from his mother womb, on just coming down was in sujood and saying, calling Allah Almighty, Ummati, Ummati, my nation, Ya Allah. When he dressed by prophecy, Ummati, Ummati, was calling Allah Almighty. When he passing away from this life was saying, Ummati, Ummati, to whom, Ya Jibreel, I am going to leave my nation, my Ummah. And in day of Yawm al-Qiyamah, and it will be a Friday also, Allah Almighty making the day of Yawm al-Qiyamah to be a Friday, the first whom the earth will be opening on, it will be beloved Muhammadun Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The first to be coming up from the earth to meet the divine presence of Allah Almighty on His throne. And he will say, just sitting in his grave, when he will be invited by Sayyidina Jibreel alayhi salam to the divine presence of Allah Almighty, he will say, Ya Jibreel, Ummati, Ummati, my nation, my nation. And Jibreel will tell him, yet no one Allah created or survived again or recreated them except Sayyidina Jibreel alayhi salam and 6 with him, they are altogether 7, to be the ones inviting Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam to the divine presence of Allah Almighty. For this Allah created them and recreated them before making Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam to be coming up from his grave. Otherwise, the first one to be recreated, survived is beloved Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But for honoring Rasulullah, making an escort for Rasulullah, these 7 malaika, 4 of the malaika, Sayyidina al-Khudr alayhi salam, and 2 types of awliya of the nation of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they will be Allah ordering them, re-surviving them, to invite Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam to the divine presence of Allah Almighty. And he will tell Sayyidina Jibreel, because he will wake him up, the first he will say, Ummati, Ummati, Ya Jibreel, my nation, my nation. And Sayyidina Jibreel alayhi salam will tell him, no one yet is re-survived except you, my beloved Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Allah inviting you to him to make a seclusion between him and you before Allah Almighty ordering the angel Israfil to blow the horn and everyone to be survived again and to be crowded to the divine presence of Allah Almighty. And like this, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he will be the first to be making sujood in between the hands of Allah Almighty, and he is the one to be dressed by Allah Almighty by all divine powers to order Sayyidina Israfil, this malaik Israfil alayhi salam, to blow in the horn for all creation to be survived and to be dressed by their soul and to be crowded to Allah Almighty. And it will be Friday, Yawm al-Jumu'ah. And for this Allah Almighty didn't give this day. Even Sayyidina Musa alayhi salam was asking this day, Sayyidina Isa was asking this day, or Sayyidina Ibrahim alayhi salam asking this day, Sayyidina Nuh asking this day. Allah didn't give it to any of the prophets. He kept it for his beloved Rasulullah, Sayyidina Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, to his beloved Rasul and to the nation of Rasulullah. Because Allah Almighty in this day dressing them by what cannot be imagined from God's generosity, even all big prophets, all the prophets before Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and all awliya and all worshippers, even in a dream, in their dream was not able to see what Allah Almighty is dressing to beloved Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and to his nation in the day of Friday, of Jumu'ah. And for this Allah Almighty choosing this day that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam will be leading special prayers in the noon time, Salatul Jumu'ah, and Allah make it obligatory and everyone to be responsible about to pray this prayer with the Imamiyya of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam at the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and after Rasulullah by all the Khalifs until the time of Khalif finished and no more Khalif. Now Allah Almighty, according to Mazhab Sayyidina al-Imam al-Shafi'i and for Mazhab, everyone who prayed the Jumu'ah, because it's obligatory, you must pray it, but you must after it to pray the 4 raka'at of Zuhr, to repeat the prayer of Zuhr, because it will not consider anymore the Jumu'ah which was given to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, because no one now is Khalif to crowd all the Ummah, the nation, under only one flag of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and to be dressed by the Tajalli of Yawm al-Jumu'ah until they will pray the Dhuhr prayer. After the prayer of Jumu'ah, then Allah will dress them by this light will descend. Allah descending in Zuhr time, in Dhuhr time, in noon time. Sayyidina Jibreel alayhi salam every week, every Friday, with a 5,000 malaika to be dressing all whom they pray the Jumu'ah prayer, and then they pray after the Zuhr prayer, after finishing the Khilafah, after the people finishing the Khilafah of Islam and start the century of the splitting of the countries, and every country is ruled by a one which is not considered to be Khalif for all the Muslim world. And for this, for man or woman, the one who prays the Zuhr prayer, especially man must pray the Jumu'ah prayer and then to pray the Zuhr prayer. And for women, if they pray at home, Zuhr prayer, all they will be blessed from Allah Almighty and Rasulullah and Sayyidina Jibreel alayhi salam with these 5,000 malaika will be dressing them, covering them with salam from Allah Almighty, with good tidings, rewards, which cannot be imagined or was seen in a dream of all other prophets before Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and their nations. And like this, Allah Almighty making this day to be a festival, a Eid, to be celebrated by the nation, by the Ummah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Shukr for Allah Almighty that He make us from the nation of beloved Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and Allah blessed us to be worshipping Him and saying, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And Allah make us to be dressed by Islam, by Iman, and to be nation of seed of Prophet Sayyidina Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Shukr for Allah Almighty, and for this Allah Almighty saying, be busy in this day by zikrullah, by thanking Allah Almighty, by shukr for Allah Almighty, by salat wa salam on Rasulullah. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said, all your salat wa salam every day in the week. How much you give salat wa salam to Rasulullah, the malaika will bring him to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And for every one prayer, Rasulullah will pray on you 10 times, and Allah Almighty will pray on you 10 times. except for Eve of Yawm al-Jum'ah and the day of Yawm al-Jum'ah, like this day. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said, no malaika to bring salat wa salam. I by myself will be presenting between my nation, and I am blessed by godly power from Allah Almighty to hear and to see everyone who is giving me salat wa salam, and hearing everyone giving me salat wa salam without the interfering of the malaika. And I am praying directly on him for every salat wa salam 10 times, and Allah Almighty also in this day blessing him for every salat wa salam on Muhammadun Rasulullah by 10 times praying on him. Like this day is very precious day for the Muslim world, for the Ummah, for the nation of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and for this, for thousands years and hundreds, more than 1,000, for 150 years, and all the nation, all the Ummah of Rasulullah keeping this day to be only for Allah Almighty, to be Allah Almighty worshipped in it, and to be in it respected Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam by giving him salat wa salam, and to be busy with zikrullah azza wa jal, and to stop everything related to this physical life, to dunya, and to be busy with akhirah, with Allah Almighty and Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But nowadays the people, all they miss this way, and they are taking it as if an ordinary day, not important day for them, neither making the eve of it full with zikrullah or salat wa salam on Rasulullah, neither making the day to be busy with Allah Almighty and with Rasulullah, and Allah making in this day 1 hour, whom Allah will, in it, the one who is busy with Allah Almighty and Rasulullah will be accepted and welcomed and blessed by divinely godly lights from Allah Almighty and Rasulullah, and Allah will upgrade him and ascend him in this hour to be in neighborhood of Allah Almighty and Rasulullah. Physically, Rasulullah will be in this hour present with all his ummah, and Allah Almighty will be looking from His Highness on the Ummah whom they are busy in this hour on worshipping, making zikrullah azza wa jal, salat wa salam on Rasulullah, praising Allah Almighty, glorifying Allah Almighty. And all of the people, they are headless from this hour, which Allah chooses in this day for the nation of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. All of them try to make this day to be working day or busy or useless thing they are doing in it, neglecting all about Allah Almighty or Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and they are making themselves to be free from any connection with heavens, and to be only connected with shaitan, with the satanic word in them, with their desires, and to talk on the back of each other, and to be spending their time in useless things which Allah doesn't like and Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And for this Allah Almighty appointing awliyaullah to be on behalf of the nation, completing the worshipping of the nation of Ummah of Rasulullah, perfecting them on behalf of them, busy with Allah Almighty, with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and giving salat and salam of Rasulullah. And for the Sufi ways, all the Imams of Sufi ways, especially the Naqshbandi way, Sayyidina Abu Bakr al-Siddiq and Sayyidina Shah al-Naqshband, Imam of this way, and the Imam of the Khatm al-Khajatan, Sayyidina Abdul Khalid al-Wajdawani, they appointed for all Grand Shaykh the eve of Friday to be crowded by all their murids gathering and to make zikr and khatam, zikrullah azza wa jal, salat wa salam on Rasulullah, to make all the night busy by praising Allah Almighty, calling Allah Almighty, making zikr of Allah Almighty, giving salat wa salam on Rasulullah, meeting on love of Allah Almighty, love of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, love of awliya, love of each other, to be dressed by blessing and forgiveness and mercies from Allah Almighty and shafa'ah from Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And even though all the murids and plenty of whom they say we are Sufi one, all they say we have appointment in this time. We are busy, we cannot come. We have something to do. And every one of them is trapped by shaitan and running from the meeting of awliyaullah and to be spending this time on love to Allah Almighty and love to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And Allah is so patient with all the nation for the sake of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Is patient with children of Adam alayhi salam. But there is going to come a day when every one of us is going to be wake up. And this day when the angel of death will come and will flap you, and then you will be unconscious from the physical world which you were living, and you will wake up from it and you will be present in the akhirah life, in the other life, and then you are looking at all these divine, godly world and what Allah Almighty prepared for the mu'mins, for the believer, the ones whom they were busy with Allah Almighty and Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and how you make yourself not to be one from them and to be getting all these good tidings from Allah Almighty. And at that time you will be so shyful from Allah Almighty, from Rasulullah, and you will be sweating and sweating and sweating, and then you will leave this body and you will go up to be questioned by Allah Almighty and Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And then there the one will be biting his fingers, eating his hands, ashamed from Allah Almighty, saying, if I was in the way of Rasulullah, if I took Rasulullah the Imam for me and I was well guided by him, better for me than I was busy with friends, with families, with useless things which make me to miss zikrullah azza wa jal, especially in such a day like Friday. Allah Almighty make all the spiritual fruits of all divinely heavenly maqams to be dressed on the tree of humbleness. And the Imam of humbleness is sealed of Prophet Muhammadur Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam didn't give anyone a chance to be more humble than him. He was the Imam of humbleness in the divine presence of Allah Almighty, and the first to teach his Sahaba how to love each other and to be humble with each other, how to be open-hearted and serving each other, and how everyone to be in humbleness for the other. The same, all his successors, all awliya, the first to teach their murids to be humble with each other, to be serving each other, to be loving each other by everyone kissing the hand of each other, everyone kissing the feet of each other, making as much as he can himself to be humble and less than the other. and Allah Almighty making all the divinely maqams, all the divinely heavenly stations and ranks and all mi'raj in the of our heavenly oceans, godly oceans, to reach to them, the fruits of them all will be given to the one who is dressed by humbleness. And this, the tree of humbleness, the Imam of it started, their roots is Muhammadun Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and these trees go up to the throne of Allah Almighty, where the end of it, the top of these trees is the throne of Allah Almighty. And so anyone who is relating himself to humbleness and trying to teach himself humbleness and to be humble with everyone of creation of Allah Almighty, especially with Ummah of Rasulullah, with the nation of Rasulullah, the Umaris with each other and loving each other and loving everyone of children of Adam alayhi salam, then Allah will make him to be like a leaf or a branch from this tree. And this tree will go up to the throne of Allah Almighty, and whatever Allah Almighty dressing the throne will be dressed over this tree, where Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he is the root, he is this tree, will be distributing all these maqams, all these heavenly godly rewards, all these heavenly stations, all these heavenly oceans from Allah Almighty of reality, secrets, lights, knowledge, will be distributed for all whom they are stuck on this tree as a leaf or a branch, or they are holding by this tree of humbleness. And all this will be distributed by Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam on day of Jumu'ah, of Friday. From Jumu'ah to Jumu'ah, from Friday to Friday, Allah will grant this in this hour to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam all these fruits of humbleness of this tree, and Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam will be dressing all whom they are stuck to this tree as a leaf of it, or as a branch of it, or as catching by it. All these what coming from Allah Almighty, and Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam will be dressing them. And Allah Almighty making the Imam of proudness, the Imam of proudness, and making the tree of proudness. And the Imam of proudness is Iblis, Shaitan. He didn't leave any one to be proud in proudness, to be Imam in proudness, much more than him. He was the highest maqam of proudness, whom he was fighting Allah Almighty, facing Allah Almighty and telling him, I refuse to obey you. Directly to Allah Almighty, saying, I refuse to obey you and to make sujood to Adam. And Allah cursing him and making him the Imam of proudness. He is the roots of the tree of proudness. And the tree of proudness, the roots of it, Allah making it in the lowest valley of Jahannam, and the top of it on the cover of Jahannam. And so everyone who dressed by proudness, everyone who dressed by enmity and hatred, and by seeing himself something important like Shaitan, and disobeying Allah Almighty, and trapped by Shaitan and following him, he will be dressed by whatever Allah will descend on Shaitan, on Iblis, all kind of curses, all kind of la'na, all kinds of the valleys of Jahannam, all kinds of punishment which Allah promised in the Holy Quran will be descended over this tree till the roots, and the one who distributes these fruits of proudness is shaitan, for all whom they are leaves or branches or catching this tree, and they will be all of them under the curse of Allah Almighty, under the curse of all malaika, under the curse of all prophets and all children of Adam alayhi salam. And like that, the one must be always keeping himself either in the ocean and catching the tree of humbleness, and in the ocean of humbleness to be following the Imamiyya of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the Imam, the Shaykh of humbleness, or to be in the other side, if he like to be famous, to be great, to be well known, to be a businessman, to be so rich, to be very proud, like the cousin of Sayyidina Musa alayhi salam, Qarun, whom Allah mentioning him in the Holy Quran, and Allah giving him from wealth and money and rich, that the keys of his safes of the rooms where he put his money in it cannot be carried by camels, and camels cannot even carry the keys of all these chambers where it's full with the wealth of Qarun. Allah like this give him, but instead to be humble and catching by the tree of humbleness, and to be spending all this on the way of Allah Almighty and on the weak of the Muslims or mu'mins at that time, on time of Sayyidina Musa, he was following shaitan, he was following Fir'aun, he was following Haman, he was one of this whom they were the enemy of Allah Almighty, and they represent the tree of proudness, representing shaitan, and for this Allah Almighty sent on them curses. And even he was the cousin of Sayyidina Musa alayhi salam, Allah blessed him by curse from him, by la'na from him, and make the earth to open under his house, and he and his family and all these chambers, rooms full with his wealth, all of them, the earth swallowed them and they were finished. Until the mu'mins of children of Israel, whom they used to say, if we have such a wealth like him, how will we in prosperity? Then they were repenting to Sayyidina Musa alayhi salam, repenting to Allah Almighty, that if Allah give us like this and He make the earth to be open and swallowing us and finishing us, then we will be going with angerness of Allah Almighty and punishment from Allah Almighty, and we will be in Jahannam following the Imam of proudness, who is Iblis, Shaitan. And for this day is the day Allah give it to the weak of the nation of Rasulullah, to the weak of the Ummah of Rasulullah, to the weakest of the Murids, of whom they are following Sufi ways, to the weakest of whom they are catching the tree of humbleness, to the humble ones, the ones whom they are taking sealed of Prophet, beloved Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and his successors to be the imams of them, and showing all kind of humbleness. In this day Allah Almighty will be dressing them from the oceans of the proudness of Allah Almighty, of the kibriya of Allah Almighty, the generosity of Allah Almighty, the oceans of lights, of good tidings, of mercies, of forgiveness, and upgrade them in that hour, in this 24 hour, ending by the azan of Maghrib, according time of Madinatul Munawwara or Sham al-Sharif, the Holy Land, Maulana say and Ranche. By this time it will be ended, and Allah will grant them and upgrade them and make them to be invited spiritually, for their physical body is not ready to be ascending or to carry these maqams. They will be spiritually invited, and for awliya they will be physically and spiritually invited to be in neighborhood in the divine presence of Allah Almighty and Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and all prophets, all Sahaba, all awliya who passed away, all you will be with them in this hour, dressing by Allah Almighty and crowning you, Allah Almighty, crowning the one whom is a leaf or a branch or catching by this tree of humbleness to be dressed and crowned by Allah Almighty by all means of godly gifts and presents and godly good tidings and rewarding from Allah Almighty. And for the one whom they are behind the shaitan and catching by the tree of proudness, and or they are a leaf of it or a branch of it, by this wealth which they have, instead to spend it in the way of Allah Almighty, they are spending it in the way of shaitan. They are giving themselves all whatever their ego's desire, they are giving, following their satanic world, happy with shaitan, with decorated life, busy themselves all days and especially this day by everything make them to disobey Allah Almighty or to be running away from Allah Almighty or from busy with Allah Almighty or with zikrullah or salat wa salam on Rasulullah. They will be then well dressed by Allah Almighty, and Allah will reward them and dress them by all means of what will be dressed to Iblis, to Satan, to Shaitan, from curses, from la'na, from curses, from punishment, from all valleys of Jahannam, all the fruits of the valleys of Jahannam, all the fruits of curses of Allah Almighty, from the bottom of the valleys till the cover of Jahannam, were the top of this tree. And for this, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said, be careful either to be dressing yourself and to teach yourself and to try to make yourself in the way of humbleness, and then your Shaykh, your Imam in this way is Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and his successors, awliyaullah and the Sahaba, or you will choose the way of proudness, and this, the Imam of this way, your Shaykh, then he will be Shaitan, who is the Imam of the way of proudness and leading you to Jahannam, to hell, and to all curses and punishment from Allah Almighty. And you are free to choose. Allah giving you a free will, putting you in the middle, and telling you this right way of humbleness, Imamiyya, Shaykh of it, Rasulullah, leading you to neighborhood to Allah Almighty and divine presence of Allah Almighty and paradises. And this left hand is the way of proudness, and the Imam of it, your Shaykh, will be Shaitan, Iblis, and all this decorated life, all these desires of the ego, all the happiness of the ego, but this will lead you to Jahannam, to hell, and to curses and punishment from Allah Almighty. You are free to choose. Allah this only giving free will to everyone to choose in which way he likes to be. Either to be the way of humbleness, either the way of Rasulullah and to be his Shaykh Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and Sahaba and the successors of the Sahaba, awliyaullah, and to be in paradises, in neighborhood to Allah Almighty and invited by Allah Almighty, or to choose this the other way, Allah giving you free will, and He will create for you a power also to, if you want to choose the way of proudness and to be in the Imamiyya of Satan, of Shaitan, and to be following his way, and you will be rewarded from Allah Almighty also by all means of curses, of la'na, of punishment, of all suffering, all burdens, all the fruits of the valleys of Jahannam. For ordinary non-believers, they will be under the cover on the top of this tree. where it is a little bit softer. But for the Muslims, for the whom they pretend to be mu'mins, they are, and following this way, they are known as as Allah Almighty defining them in the Holy Quran, they are the hypocrite. And Allah saying, for these Muslims, mu'mins, who are choosing the way of shaitan and desires and following proudness, and they are in the imamiyah of shaitan, they are not going to be rewarded like the non-believers, to be in the soft part and near the cover, where that's the fire and all these punishment and curses, but they are going to be in the roots, in the lowest valley of Jahannam, in the lowest part of Jahannam, with shaitan even lower than shaitan. إِنَّ الْمُنَافِقِينَ فِي الدَّرَكِ الْأَسْفَلِ مِنَ النَّارِ, Allah says. In the lowest valley, under the roots of this tree, in the lowest part of Jahannam, they will be well rewarded by Allah Almighty. And so we say Astaghfirullah, we repent to Allah Almighty, we ask tawbah from Allah Almighty, we ask mercies from Allah Almighty and forgiveness, and Allah to make us in the way of humbleness, in the way of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in the way of Sultan al-Awliya, Mawlana Shaykh Nazim, Grand Shaykh, all Grand Shaykh, Sayyidina Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, Sayyidina Umar, Sayyidina Usman, Sayyidina Ali, Ridwanullah alayhim, Sayyidina Fatima az-Zahra, Ahl Bayt al-Nabi, Sahaba of Rasulullah, and all Awliyaullah Azza wa Jal, to be our Imam, taking our Imam Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. This is our niyyah, our intention, and we are trying as much as we can Allah to help us to be in this way, so that we'll be always under the Allah to be pleased from us and happy from us, and we are pleased from Allah Almighty and happy with Allah Almighty and with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And Allah Almighty to protect us and to save us, not to enter in the way of proudness, in the way which the shaitan is the imam of it. Then we will be under the la'na of Allah Almighty, and we will be then missing the way of zikrullah of Allah Almighty. May Allah Almighty protect us from the way of shaitan, from the traps of shaitan, from the way of proudness. Take off, Allah Almighty, all proudness from our hearts. Take off all love of this dunya from our hearts. Take off all kind of anything which you don't like from our hearts. And rest our hearts, O Allah Almighty, by all things which you love and like, and you will be pleased. And Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam likes, and we will be pleased and happy. And rest our hearts by all whatever Awliyaullah and Sahaba and Sultan of Awliya and Grand Shaykh will be pleased and happy. Bless our hearts by the lights of humbleness, by the lights of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and his successors and Sultan al-Awliya and Sahib al-Zaman, and bless our hearts by your divinely lights of your holy essence and the holy essence of reality of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and crowd us with the Siddiqs. واحشرنا يا الله مع النبيين والصديقين والشهداء والصالحين وحسن أولئك رفيقا. الله 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 عزيز الله 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 كريم الله 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 سبحان الله 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 سلطان الله. You are Sultan of Allah Almighty, and we are your weakest servant. Support us, forgive us, mercy us, O Allah Almighty, help us, O Allah Almighty. And Ya Rasulullah, support us, help us, bless us by sincerity, O Allah Almighty and Rasulullah, and love of you of Allah Almighty, love of Rasulullah, love of Sultan Awliya, Awliya Ahlul Bayt, Sahaba of Rasul, love of Sahib al-Zaman, and all whom they are in the Imamiyya of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and make us to be in the Imamiyya of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, make us to be blessed by humbleness of Rasulullah, by Muhammadi humbleness, by Awliya humbleness, by Ahlul Bayt and Sahaba humbleness, by godly humbleness, O Allah Almighty. Bless us, O Allah Almighty, and protect us from shaitan and from proudness and everything which you doesn't like or Rasulullah doesn't like. Hurmat al-Habib, Hurmat al-Fajr. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. At least 100 times this day to give salat wa salam on Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Don't miss to give salat wa salam on Rasulullah at least 100 times. I am not telling you 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000, at least 100 times. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Inna Allah wa malaikatahu yusalluna ala al-Nabi. Ya ayyuha alladhina amanu sallu alayhi wa